Good morning. So, it has been a while since I did a Jesus Bubble series. And part of that has been because I've been so sick for months with all the COVID stuff and the complications afterward and just everything. But part of it has also been that I've been kind of lacking in inspiration on what book or passage series to do for the next Jesus Bubble. So those of you who have done Jesus Bubble stuff before, those of you who have joined me for Jesus Bubble stuff before, know that it's super raw. I usually do it first thing in the morning. This is not first thing in the morning today. And, but it's like a no makeup, bedhead, early morning, straight out of bed, time with Jesus. And I started it actually several years ago when I would get up at like 7 o'clock in the morning and spend time with Jesus. And then my kids would get up and come interrupt me. So I started getting up at like 6:30 and then 6 and then 5:30 and then 5. And every time I got up earlier, they would wake up earlier too, which I was just like, oh my goodness, stop. Please sleep longer. But I started telling them that there's like this force field around me. It's an invisible bubble. And inside this bubble, I'm spending time with Jesus, and they can have their Jesus bubble, and I'm going to have my Jesus bubble. And this is why they can't come inside my Jesus bubble when it's just time for me and Jesus. So that's how the Jesus Bubble name got started. It was, I don't know, back in like 2016 or something like that, 17. And the last one, we've gone through Isaiah, we've gone through several other things, and then we went through Diane Lingberg's book, Redeeming Power. And recently, I have been enjoying this one, Redeeming Heartache. Okay, I know it's backwards. I'm gonna have to flip that next time. Redeeming Heartache by Dr. Dan Allender and Kathy Lorsel. And they are co-founders of the Allender Center on the West Coast of the United States of America. And this is their brand new book. And I have been so profoundly blessed that I wrote them. I'm hoping to have them both on the Decode podcast here soon. But I wrote them and started asking them, look, I really would love to read this book out loud to my audience and just discuss it. So they gave me permission to do that. They thought that sounded great, and I was thrilled for the opportunity. So here we are. I have dropped a link in it. If you like what you hear today from them and you want to get a copy and follow along, there's a link in the caption for this video. And let's get started. So, Redeeming Heartache, how past suffering reveals our true calling. I'm going to read you the inside flap of the book here. You could push the pain away, or you could dig deep and find a wellspring of joy. We've all experienced loss and disappointment in our lives. Many of us have learned to deal with our wounds in ways that lead us toward the opposite of restoration, wholeness, and fulfillment. We push the pain as far away from us as possible. In Redeeming Heartache, Dr. Dan Allender and counselor Kathy Lorsel walk with you through a journey of profound inner transformation, from the shame and hurt of old emotional wounds to true freedom, healing, and connection with God and others. Identify your core trauma in one of the 3 outcast archetypes: the widow, orphan, or stranger, and chart your path of growth into the God-given roles of priest, prophet, or king and queen. Your past does not have to dictate your life. In fact, your heart wounds have uniquely prepared you to experience more joy. Now is the time to answer the call to healing and discover your life's incredible purpose. All right, the introduction is by Dan Allender, and it is called Our Longing for Peace. Now, we're not going to get through the whole thing. Well, we might get through this one. It's only a couple of pages. I'll try to keep them short, under 15 minutes, preferably like 9 to 12 minutes. Life is a long search for what we lost in Eden. Though we have seasons of profound loss, we experience moments of such sweetness that what we have suffered seems to be put in the background. But heartache never goes away and joy never seems to last, and so we plod on, moving from the past, hoping that what is finished remains there. But we intuit that what is past not only remains with us in the present, but also speeds ahead of us into the future. By the way, if you think someone on your Facebook feed or your friend list would like this or be blessed by it, please feel free to hit share and pass it on. We must turn to the past to move into the future. We can't return to Eden, but we can move into the kingdom God has given us to bring heaven to earth. Everyone knows that something is not right. It may be a gnawing desire that is not fulfilled, or sweet joy over a special event that fades before the night is over. A few months ago, I was sitting on our front lawn with my 8-year-old granddaughter, Elsa. It was a lovely summer morning in the Pacific Northwest, and we were watching a phalanx of eagles fly over our yard. Elsa asked, "Papa, do you ever feel weird?" I looked at her and said, "Elsa, I will answer that as honestly as I can, but can I ask first, what has prompted your question?" She looked me squarely in the eyes and said, "I knew you would ask that question. No, you go first." I told her how my mother made me wear a pair of shorts that other kids mocked, and that I felt humiliated and weird. I told her another story about a meeting the week before in which I offered my views on an issue and everyone looked at me as if I were a cartoon character. We talked until she finally told me the story of a few friends laughing at what she had worn to school. It is not my practice to confront 8-year-old girls who mock my granddaughter, but I was incensed and triggered far beyond what was appropriate. I wanted to go to war to restore peace. It may be an understandable impulse, but in my anger, I was trying to fight my way back into Eden through my granddaughter for my own redemption as a weird little boy. This book invites you to a journey not to resolve past suffering, but to wrestle with it until you gain the blessing you are meant to receive, to walk even with a limp into more joy and to experience a measure of healing. It is an odd, wild, compelling trek, and we are honored to be with you on this pilgrimage. I say we because my co-author, Kathy Loerzel, and I are on this journey together and with other colleagues at the Allender Center. Kathy is my boss. She is the executive vice president of the Allender Center, which is housed at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. It is odd to be the name related to the Allender Center and yet work for someone who is nearly 30 years younger. To understand how that could be, you'll need to understand her story and mine, and how our suffering set the trajectory of our calling. It is a lovely story. And now we hear from Kathy. The first time I heard Dan Allender speak, I was 25 years old and wondering how I'd come to be sitting in the middle of a crowd of students at a relatively unknown graduate school within a business park in the suburbs of Seattle. It was 2004, and I had traveled 3,000 miles in my Malibu blue Ford Focus, leaving behind a secure life in Northern Virginia, outfitted with friends, family, and a job at IBM. Suddenly, I woke from my transitional haze to see a strange man I had never heard of taking his place at the front of the classroom in the bowels of an office building akin to the ones inhabited by dentists. I had been hoodwinked by God and my best friend, Abby Wong Hefter, into quitting my job and moving across the country to study psychology. It was utter madness. And in the moments before Dan spoke, I was planning what I would say to my former boss when I begged for my job back. And then this odd man with scraggly hair and a mustache standing before us began to speak. At first I was skeptical, as had been my general disposition up to that point. But as I listened, I heard him weave psychology, story, and the gospel in a way that captured my attention and resonated with my desire for more of God, more of Jesus. It felt authentic, provocative, and heartbreaking. I was mesmerized and undone all at the same time. In a moment, I realized this was why I had come to the opposite edge of the country. I was here to understand more of what this strange man was telling me and to join something of the Spirit of God who was alive and healing in this puzzling place called the Mars Hill Graduate School. 15 years have passed since I became Dan's student. During that time, Mars Hill became the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, which in turn birthed the Allender Center, co-founded in 2010 by Dan and me and Dan's wife, Becky. Now Dan, at 68, is nearing the end of his career, and I, at 40, have become his boss. My role is to create infrastructure for the Allender Center, develop talent, raise funds, facilitate small groups, teach, and handle the crises and complexities inherent in the daily operation of any organization. Dan is the heart and soul of what we do, training, counseling professionals to work in the area of trauma and abuse. The focus of Dan's calling and career for more than 3 decades. Dan is amazing, and I love working with him. But our moments of tension and conflict have been profound. Our stories, just as in every friendship, work relationship, and marriage, collide. I am a good woman, he is a good man, but my history involves succeeding through tireless, goal-oriented labor while he has thrived on intuition, adrenaline, and risk-taking. As an extroverted, bold, and bossy kid, I was often in situations where I was out in front of my skis socially. My family was not particularly religious in my early years. One summer, we went to visit some dear family friends who were devout Episcopalians. The father was an intimidating figure with prematurely gray hair and a scowl that rarely left his face. I already had the sense that he thought poorly of our family. We were too wild and undisciplined, and my parents weren't raising us in a way that garnered his approval. Even at that young age, I could sense this. So when we attended their church on Sunday morning, I quickly attempted to ascertain how to behave properly in this strange setting. As their children sailed through the liturgy with ease, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten as I tried to mimic their every move. I pretended to recite the incantations, even though the words were difficult to read and I couldn't understand when to sit, stand, or kneel. As I tried to play the part I felt was expected of me, my feelings of exposure and shame intensified. My face, flushed with embarrassment, began to burn, and I felt hot and breathless, as though I were trying to keep up with a pack of trained athletes. I sensed that we were nearing the end of the service when the men up front stood and held up a white disc, strangely called the bread, and a cup, even more disturbingly called the blood. I knew instantly that things were about to get worse. I don't recall ever having seen communion celebrated before, and as I observed rows of people stand and proceed to the front of the sanctuary, the burning on my face spread down my neck, and I was seized with dread. I tried to understand what people were doing so I could get it right. I studied the other kids, desperate for clues, but they were calm and comfortable with a ritual their young bodies knew well. I was the outsider who didn't belong here. I could feel the Father watching me. Tears began to well up, but I blinked them back with a determination to fit in. If I could pay close enough attention and get the moves right, maybe no one would know I was entirely out of my element. Excuse me. Finally, it was our row's turn to stand up and shuffle toward the front of the church. As we moved forward, I could no longer feel my body. I followed the other kids and knelt at the altar. The priest and his assistant made their way down the row. My only saving grace was being in the middle of the pack. I watched each of the kids as they put their hands out crisscrossed and received the round disc the priest placed there. Then they ate it. Okay, I thought, I can do that. The bread was dry, yet dissolved quickly in my mouth. After that, the other man came along holding a fancy silver cup, and people drank from it. I concentrated, holding my shame at bay, and sipped with trembling lips, hoping he wouldn't notice my anxious face. After it was all over, I stood up with the rest of my row and walked back to my seat. The rest of the service passed quickly, but the damage had been done. The feeling of being a stranger in a strange land, exposed and humiliated, was terrifying. And I knew one thing for sure, I never wanted to feel it again. This is one of many experiences that have molded in me a heart bound to perfectionism and determined to avoid humiliation. I spent much of my life trying to do the right things, think the right things, say the right things, and keep my internal world in check. To make sure, oh, hold on a second. We're talking about the wild, untamed part of me. It sounds like we have some wild, untamed people in the house. Hey kids, can you shut the door, please? Please pick it up. No, shut up! Oh, we may need to stop here. All right, we will pick up back here on page 5 tomorrow morning. And this, again, is the book, Redeeming Heartache. Sounds like I need to go redeem some heartache in the other room. And I hope you will join me.
Sorry about my sister.